Good evening. How's everybody tonight? Good? Is it Friday yet? Getting there. Well, welcome to, I believe this is our second One Health seminar for the semester. We've got a great presentation coming up for you, but first I'd like to go through One Health again with you. Most of you have heard this 10, 20, perhaps 30 times, but we'll go through it anyway. One Health, what the heck is this? So One Health is essentially recognizing that really on a global scale, we're looking at systems approaches that are needed for solving the problems that we have. And these systems approaches have to recognize that it requires transdisciplinary approaches to answer these questions. It can't be that, you know, if you're a conservation and wildlife management student, you know all the answers. You need people who know something about soils, more about plants. You need people who understand people and why they do what they do. Perhaps an understanding economics and other components. So One Health is just trying to get across that we need to take a broader view of things and kind of take all these things into consideration. Almost 5 years ago, DelVal started with this. I think we're kind of uniquely in a position to do this because we're a small institution. Our silos are not as well fixed as they may be at larger institutions. And hopefully our community also recognizes that transdisciplinary kinds of actions are really where the future is and what we need. The way we approach this is in a variety of ways. We do it through education. My students that are in this room have been badgered to death by me about One Health, and hopefully they feel that really I'm talking about something that makes sense. Research components, getting people to engage with each other and approach questions in transdisciplinary ways. And then outreach, and that's what this is all about. So each semester we have 6 seminars. We try to get a variety of topics involved, and hopefully you find stuff that is interest of you and that you'll keep on coming back, whether you receive credit from a class or whether it's something that really you find inspiring. For those of you who are from the community, if you're not already receiving email from me or from somebody else about our One Health seminars, at the end of the evening, if you'd like to put your email address down here, we'd be happy to add you to the list. So tonight, just wanted to point out that this One Health thing is starting to catch fire. So there's a World One Health Day that occurred back in the 3rd of November. We at DelVal, for the first time, actually had a One Health Week. And this was entirely student-oriented. So we had student presentations, we had competitions, kind of looking at this from our institution's point of view. One of our students from business, Michelle Glitzer, asked the question, what is One Health? And so she wanted to know from a different points of view of people on campus, folks from ag, folks from humanities and business, and folks from life sciences. And so she came up with this relatively short video. I hope you enjoy it. She did a great job with it.
For me, One Health is a recognition that we as humans are a part of a global ecosystem, and that the more that we recognize that we have connections to the environment, we have connections to plants and animals, and those interactions go back and forth, the better off we're all going to be.
Really no one global problem can be addressed just by one discipline. That's impossible, and it's important to incorporate a plethora of approaches.
For a small university like us, we have this tremendous opportunity to work together to look at and solve, hopefully, some of the world's problems.
It's very easy to go someplace where a species is endangered and say, okay, we need to preserve this environment, but we need to know how that impacts people. So that brings in the humanities, it brings in sociology, it brings in psychology. How does it impact that local community, telling them they can no longer go into this area?
I try to encourage my students to go to One Health seminars. One Health seminars it's a speaker series where we invite experts, subject matter experts or writers or performers, people who do work that spans interdisciplinary projects. They come to campus and they talk about their field of interest in a way that's approachable to our students.
What the seminars themselves are designed to impact students from all of the colleges at university, so that we have people who are from sciences thinking about business sides, that we have people thinking about the psychological impacts of problems, as well as going, oh, well, this is an animal problem, this is a plant problem, it's a human problem, it's all of our problems.
DelVal is one of the leading organizations in the area, and also they're nationally and globally recognized for their One Health seminars. And something that I'm really excited about that we're going to be doing this year is One Health Week. So we'll be celebrating different One Health activities.
So our students get exposed to professions that might be new to them, and professions specifically that are multidisciplinary. And so maybe they can be part of the solution in the future by choosing one of those careers.
If students come here, they major in a particular area, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. They get to know that area well. But I think it's important that they recognize that people in other disciplines have something to offer.
If you want to learn more information about One Health at DelVal, it's simply delval.edu/onehealth.
So I'm real pleased to announce that we have a co-sponsor for tonight. The Heritage Conservancy has been a co-sponsor for a number of our seminars, and tonight they're very happy to sponsor our speaker that we've got tonight too. One thing I want to point out to the students, if you're thinking about leaving early, both Heritage Conservancy and the Delaware River Basin Commission have positions available. So you might want to stick around to find out more about those. So Shannon, take it. Paid positions. Never heard of that word before, so I forgot it.
Thank you, Reg. Hello, I'm Shannon Friedebos-Siller with Heritage Conservancy. We're a local nonprofit based in Doylestown, and we work to protect land and historic places throughout Bucks and Montgomery counties. So beyond our local work, we are part of regional initiatives to support land and water protection, to address the disconnect that often exists in people's minds between what we do on the land and how it impacts the water we're drinking. One of these initiatives is the Alliance for Watershed Education that we're a partner in. It's a collaborative group of environmental centers ranging from the state of Delaware up through Philadelphia, through Trenton, and all the way up through the Poconos. We're all working collectively to directly improve the watershed, support clean drinking water, and to educate everyone on the importance of watershed health, to empower them to take action to protect the Delaware River and all the land surrounding it. So as Reg mentioned, for any students looking for a job, we do have, or even recent graduates, we have a watershed fellowship position open this summer. And we have up to 3 positions for conservation stewards this summer as well, all paid positions. And you'd get to do a lot of different work throughout Bucks County. Some of it will be very hands-on, some of it will be more community-oriented, working with people, getting them excited about protecting the environment. So feel free to visit our website or stop up in the front lobby. I left materials out, or Reg can always put you in touch with me as well. So with that, I'm thrilled that we at Heritage Conservancy are able to support Del Val University and the Delaware River Basin Commission for the seminar this evening. Tackling water protection across a large area like the Delaware River Basin is a huge undertaking, but such a critical one, since millions of people receive their drinking water from the river. And a lot of them don't know that they receive it from the river and how important that is. So Peter Eschbach is the Director of External Affairs and Communications at the Delaware River Basin Commission, and he is tasked with the critical job of communicating across the general public and to key stakeholders about how to protect this important resource. I've only met Peter once before this evening, but at that meeting, he shared some eye-opening research on what the DRBC is finding in the water and its potential human impacts. Peter and DRBC's work is essential to protecting our region's most important water resource, the Delaware River. So please join in me in welcoming Peter. start.
No, I'm good, thanks. I think I'm good. Well, good evening. How many people ever heard of the DRBC? Okay. Some of you, half of you are lying, and the other half, I'm impressed. You're way ahead of most of the population, nearly all of the elected officials in the Commonwealth. And so I'll spend a little bit of time on us, but more importantly on the basin itself. So this is the obligatory why we're here. I'm going to tell you a little about who we are. It's almost as important as to who we're not, what we do, and why it matters. And I was telling Reg, I came from the school of just throw a picture up there and talk to the picture, but I worked with PhDs. We're all engineers. You're lucky because typically I would just be reading line after line after line of text to you. And since we're going to be here for about, what, 2.5 hours, 3, something like that, it might not go well. Not kidding. So let's talk first off about the basin itself. You would be surprised how many people do not know what a basin is. I went to Washington a few months ago and met with a couple of new freshman congressmen to try and give them sort of a 101 on who we are, what we do, why they need to fund us. And I all of a sudden realized they had no clue what I meant by basin. I literally had to say, please don't take this the wrong way, a basin simply means that the geographic boundary is such that, let me try and use the laser here. There we go. If a drop of water, of rain, falls inside this amoeba-looking blob, it ends up in the Delaware River and ultimately in the bay and out into the ocean. If it drops over here, it's going into the Susquehanna River and down to the Chesapeake Bay. If it ends over here, it's probably in the Raritan River, headed out, or the Hudson River, depending how far north you go. So it's a geographic, physical basin, like your bathtub, all right? So that's the basin. The basin itself, about 13 million people depend on the waters of the basin. And what's crazy about that is they don't all live in the basin. New York City gets half of its drinking water out of the basin, which I'll show you some of that in a minute. But you can see these are some of the diversions over here. New York actually takes out they have 4.5 million people, that's about half their population, that get water from 3 large reservoirs up in New York, up in here. And yeah, just FYI, so the color codes, just to show you, are 4 states, New York, Pennsylvania, the slice of New Jersey, and then, of course, Delaware down there. It's about 13.5 thousand square miles in area, 4 states, and every day we collectively take 6.4 billion gallons of water out of it. Anybody got a clue what the #1 use for water is? Back in the cheap seats, okay? Pardon me? Flushing toilets. Actually, that's like number 3. Okay, the #1 use is power generation, keeping the lights on. The power companies use more water than anybody else, and most of it, unfortunately, goes up in the way of steam, and it does not come back to the basin. It's called consumptive use. And they estimate that that water is worth about $21 billion in economic value here in the basin. So managing that basin to take care of just that economy, as you can see, is pretty important. I'm going to just run through these, but just to give you an idea of, because I know that this whole idea of One Health and the idea of everything is interconnected, it is. We, generally speaking, as a commission, are charged with the water resources, not so much the land cover, but they are inextricably linked together in that, because of runoff, pollution, et cetera. So there's an idea that can show you, some of this is from Shippensburg University, but if we can manage growth, it's going to help mitigate negative impacts, right? Because the more people you have, the more development you have, the more hard, non-permeable surface that you have, the more runoff you end up having, or the more people are using sewage treatment plants, which ultimately ends up dumping back into the tributaries and ending up in the river. The key feature of the basin is obviously the Delaware River. It is 330 miles long, and that is, pardon me, from down here at the where the bay meets the ocean, 330 miles all the way up to the headwaters in New York. The cool thing about this river that's different than almost every other river in the country is no matter where you stand on that 330 miles, it's another state on the other side. So you immediately can see the interconnected issue that you've got if, for example, New Jersey decides to do something different from a water quality standpoint, allowing the dumping of a particular chemical or whatever, you know, even if it's a different level, it immediately becomes a Pennsylvania issue. And then it all goes downstream and immediately becomes a Delaware issue. The other thing is that this river is undammed all the way. There's not a dam on there, unlike the Susquehanna, which has multiple dams all the way down to the Chesapeake. So consequently, and along with that, this is tidal. That is always sloshing back and forth. You know, the salt water's trying to reach and slosh its way upstream. It's tidal all the way to Trenton, New Jersey. By that I mean, doesn't mean it's salt water up there, but it means that the tide goes up and down all the time. And at Trenton, I think the tide is like, it's about an 8 to 10 foot difference every day there at Trenton. Which we'll talk a little bit more. And it's also, I talk about no dams, it's the largest undammed east of the Mississippi. Oops. How many people have had a chance to get out on the river at all, on the Delaware? It's great, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. If you kayak, if you fish, if you picnic, if you paddleboard, if you tube, okay? If you have no skill set whatsoever, you can get in a tube and float, okay? It's great. And these are just some pictures of, you know, recent pictures, you know, of it. I mean, here you go. And for those of you that are like me, a little older, and you remember when, well, I still remember, where is it? It's not on this. Okay, this battleship right here is the Olympia. I visited that as a Boy Scout in like 1969. My dad was the scoutmaster, and I still remember going, Dad, what smells so bad? He goes, it's the river. This is last year, right across from the battleship. They're doing paddleboard yoga on that same area that smelled so horrific. And if anybody has been to Penn's Landing in Philadelphia for any of the celebration, the ice skating, just get in a hammock and swing and sleep, you couldn't do that because it just stunk so bad all those years ago. And it's not that long ago. But this is what it looks like now. This is what it used to look like. Okay? So you can see, I mean, basically back in the 20s, state of the art of waste disposal was dump it in the water. In fact, we have a phrase, which is the solution to pollution is dilution. It was like you dump enough stuff into the river and it just kind of flows out into the ocean and it's nobody's problem. So you can see slaughterhouses discharging the canal. It just, you know, nice hat, by the way, I like that. But it was a real mess. And sometimes it looked like this. This is the what we call the Free Bridge up in between Easton and Phillipsburg. It's like the one place along the Delaware you do not have to pay a toll and don't also have to worry about the other car coming the other way taking your mirrors off. But in '55, we had a huge series of floods that it caused a lot. I mean, there were people that were killed during that, massive amounts of damage. And then flip that around, and 10 years later, we had a drought. This is Trenton. Actually, I'm standing in, or I'm not. The person taking the picture was standing in, is it Morrisville, I think, right across from Trenton. And you could literally walk across the river, right? And we're still not sure. We think that was a dinosaur at one point in time. But that's the way it used to look, and that's the way it used to be. In fact, this is, I think, 1937. This was the newspaper in Philly, and they raised the issue about how the water was so disgusting that basically you didn't even want to drink it because it smelled like, for good reason, chlorine, which they were using to treat the water at the time. Water everywhere, and no place, not a drop to drink. So we had a real problem with the water supply shortages and disputes over apportionment. That is, the jurisdiction over who's in charge. Is it the state? Is it the county, et cetera? You had massive pollution because as the largely Philadelphia, Camden, down to Wilmington, as that area, particularly Camden and Philly, just began growing and growing and growing. Think about the Navy Yard in World War II, okay? Where's all that junk go? It just went into the river. And then as I mentioned, we had serious flooding as well. There was no control over all of that. So here's the problem. You have 4 states. And if you've ever, is anybody here from New York, by the way? Oh, okay, then I'll keep my New York comments to myself. But there's a reason it's called the Empire State, all right? But if you have 4 states, 42 counties, 800 plus municipalities, and of course New York, which gets half their water from the basin, everybody's in charge. You're not going to tell any of those people what they can do with their water, et cetera. And as a result, nobody is in charge. So what's the solution? The solution was, back in 61, President Kennedy, and this is like literally very early in his term, got together with the 4 governors of the basin states, and they said, this has got to be looked at, from an interconnected, holistic perspective. It cannot be managed, based on political boundaries. So they got together and they signed what's called the Delaware River Basin Compact, which is in fact federal law, state law in all 4 states. And one of the things that did was it formed us, the Delaware River Basin Commission, given the mission. And that's the compact, it's a picture of the original compact right there. And by the way, this was our 1961 logo. I don't know if you have any graphic design folks here, but you can see that. I'm really not excited about this one, but wow, it's so much better. But either way, it gave us extensive powers and jurisdiction. You have to understand, 61, that was before the EPA was founded. That was before the Clean Water Act. That was before Earth Day. It was before Pennsylvania DEP or New Jersey DEP, all right? So as a result, it gave us an incredible amount of authority to deal with managing the water resources, particularly from 2 areas, which I'll talk about in a minute. Real quickly, we are not the Delaware River Bridge Joint Whatever Toll Commission. I cannot fix your Easy Pass for you. You'd be amazed. I went to see a guy in Philly. He was a representative out of Harrisburg in his Philly office. He goes, we love you guys. And he was a Democrat, so he just assumed that he was green and environmental, and he loved us guys. He goes, you do such a great job with the bridges. I'm like, not us, okay? We get confused with all sorts of people. We're not the Delaware River and Bay Authority. Oh, I found out one today. There's something called the Dachshund Rescue of Bucks County, DRBC. They came up in my Google search. SRBC is the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. And while we have the same names and they got kind of similar missions, they're a lot younger than we are. They don't have the jurisdiction or the kind of missions that we have. Pardon me? Thank you. I will pass that on to my executive director because, yeah. So, who are we? Basically, also another difference between us and SRBC, other than the logo, we have better looking commissioners than they do. Our commissioners are, okay, maybe not. Our commissioners are in fact the governors of the 4 basin states. And the federal government is represented by the Corps of Engineers. And it's the Major General who commands the North Atlantic Division of the Army Corps of Engineers. And even though he's in the engineers, he represents all the different federal agencies, EPA, Interior, et cetera, at their meetings. This is unusual. The other commissions have commissioners appointed by their governors. Our folks, in fact, are the governors. Let's see. And they vote. And when they vote on a topic, it's majority rule. And on 90% of the things, it's majority rule. Very few things does it require a unanimous decision, et cetera. And they meet on a quarterly basis to discuss everything from fracking to whether or not we should give a permit to a municipality to increase their well pumpage, to whether or not they're going to approve the commission's janitorial contract, for the next year. Oh, and just real quick, New York City, which of course, as you can imagine, has a large, we play a large role in how they get their water, sits not as a commissioner, but in an advisory capacity, as is someone from Philadelphia, just because of the size of that stakeholder group. I'm not going to read this to you, but it just shows you the breadth of the responsibilities that the law gives us to play with. We put together a comprehensive plan that looks at flood damage reduction, development of groundwater and water supply, which I'll talk about in a minute, recreation, fish and game, and although to be honest, we've never done really anything with the game side of that. Most of our work has been with fish. Watershed projects such as, do we need another dam, another reservoir? Protection of fisheries, i.e., do we need colder water to ensure that the health of fisheries? Is there enough water for hydroelectric power at the same time there's enough for us, to drink, take a bath, flush the toilet, et cetera. And then abatement and control of stream, and by stream I mean waterway feeding into all the water, pollution, which is what we spend most of our time on. And then, of course, developing regulations for the attainment of all those. So who does all that? Who covers the 13.5, thousand square miles, et cetera? Basically, we are professional planners, engineers, scientists, and there's, on a good day with interns, about 39 of us. We have more PhDs than you can shake a stick at. And if there's a title that has IST at the end of it, we probably got one. We get funded by the signatory members. That means the 4 basin states and the federal government are responsible for funding our operations. And our headquarters is located in West Trenton, which, if any of you know, I think West Trenton is really kind of the river or Yardley, Pennsylvania. I haven't figured it out, but so we're north of Trenton, upstream by about a mile or two. And we've been there since '74. And why? Because New Jersey gave us our building for free. So we have 2 core responsibilities, and those are essentially flow and quality. So water supply, is there enough water? And then what's the quality of that water? So let's talk about flow. And I'll talk flow first because, like we like to say, before it can be clean, it has to be wet. If you don't have the water, you can't clean it. It doesn't matter whether it's clean or dirty if you don't have it. So how wet has it been? Now, the highest year, this is a really tough thing to read, and this is not chronological. This is based on the amount of flow that we had in the river at any one point, and this is, I think, at Trenton. Yeah, median flow at Trenton. CFS is cubic foot per second, which is how we manage flow and have targets around that. So you can see we've been measuring this since 1913. And what happened was, this is, right here, is 2018. 2018 was the second second wettest year on record. And when we get rain and we all complain about, oh, rain, it's not whatever, that all goes right into the river, and the river goes up, and we have to worry about flooding, we have to worry about a number of different things. But 2018 was tough. This right here is actually 2011. Any idea why 2011? Well, maybe on there. Yes, sorry, I was going to ask. But Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee happened in 2011. And if you remember, particularly Irene just kind of came up to the northern part of the upper basin and just kind of sat there and rained and then moved off, you know, and just dumped an incredible amount of water. So those major events caused that to happen. So it's been pretty wet. How dry has it been? Okay, you can look at this over by decade, and this will show you that, you know, we've had drought emergencies. The last one was back in, I want to say 05, 04. And then actually, even though it's not on here, in 19, 17, 18, 16, the fall of 2016, we had about a month or two with no rain. And the best way, does everybody know how to solve a drought? The best way to solve a drought is to declare a drought emergency, and immediately it starts raining, which is what happened. We went through all sorts of contortions to finally get the governors to declare a drought emergency, and it rained, knocking it off. You can see what goes here is the letters up here indicate the reservoirs that are built in the basin that we use either for flood control or to have additional water to augment flow. And I'll talk a little about those reservoirs in a minute, but the thing here is you can see we haven't built a new reservoir since the 1980s. And things are changing. You know, we've got climate change to deal with. We've got sea level rise to deal with. And those aren't conceptual. In the basin, they're really happening. So we're taking a hard look at what do we need to do to adjust to that. So where do we get our water? Okay, the water for the river, as I mentioned, starts way up here in New York at the headwaters. But there are three huge reservoirs right there. They're all owned by New York City, and those are drinking water reservoirs that are designed to provide the drinking water to New York City. But, and I should point out that back in the 1950s, when they started building those, Pennsylvania and New Jersey found out about it, said, wait, you're going to cut off the water? And of course, they did what everybody does here in the great United States, was they immediately went off and they sued New York City in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, well, you can have so much for water, but you have to have enough water to continue the flow down here so that people can use the water, as well as, and I'll talk about the salt front here in a minute. You can see there are a series of reservoirs all over the place. There's the Mongap system up here, like Wallenpaupack, F.E. Walter, and generally speaking, they all have different reasons for being there. Some of them, like F.E. Walter, is a flood control reservoir. If you were to go to F.E. Walters right now, it would look empty. I mean, a little water in it, but not much. You could stand at the foot of the dam and look up at it like that because there's no water in it. Well, there's water, but not that much in it. And that's so that when it rains, north up on the Lehigh, in the northern Lehigh area, in the upper part of the basin, and all that water comes down, it fills up that rather than running downstream and wiping out Allentown, Bethlehem, and the rest of the Lehigh Valley. Down here, Blue Marsh and Beltsville, these are water supply augmentation reservoirs. And so what happens is we have a flow target, there are two actually, one here and one there. We want to keep that river flowing at a specific rate. And the reason for that is that while, and I'll talk in more detail in a second, show you a slide, but this is fresh water coming down, and the ocean is made up of what kind of water? Salt water, right? Very good, okay, extra credit, right? So what happens? The two of them meet, but when the salt water is tidal and it's pushing up, it's working its way up the river, and the only thing keeping it from working its way up the river is the fresh water coming down. So we know that in order to keep the salt at bay, literally down there, we need a target of about 3,000 cubic feet per second, which roughly comes out to about 1940 million gallons of water a day flowing past our gauge in Trenton. So sometimes Mother Nature's a little finicky and doesn't give us a lot of rain, so we'll look and we'll see the gauge go down, and we'll look and see, well, we don't have a lot of rain coming, and what we will do is we own water in these reservoirs. We'll call them up and say, release X amount, and that water then, in this case, flows down the Schuylkill or down the Lehigh into the river, augments the flow, and out into the bay, keeps the salt water back. I mentioned the fall. If you've been in November of 2016, if you'd gone out at Philly and looked at the river, it would have looked normal. It would have been flowing right by, just like you'd expect. 65% of what you would have seen was augmented flow. Because like I mentioned, we'd been going for quite some time with no rain. So the flow rates were really down. And so what you would have seen, 65% of what was going down was augmented through releases in the reservoirs. I'll just mention consumptive real quickly. The compact gives us the authority to take users that have consumptive use, so power companies. If you're a thermoelectric power generation station and you're using water from the river to create steam to generate power, the steam goes up and out into the atmosphere. It does not come back. It's not like when you flush the toilet or you use your sink, that water goes down into the sewer system, goes through a sewer treatment plant, and goes back into the basin, right? It goes back into a stream. It gets cleaned up, and it goes into as effluent and ends up back in the river and then flowing down. That is non-consumptive. Consumptive is like what a power company, like the Limerick power station, blows it into the sky. We don't see that again, despite what you were taught in fourth grade about the water cycle. It does come down someplace at some time, but not in the basin necessarily, not right away. So that's called consumptive use. And we have the authority to look at that water, figure out about how much of that water is gone, and then we can either do one of two things. We actually have the authority to tell the power companies to shut it off, which that would be insane, right? You know, I mean, telling the power companies to stop generating power. Or what we do is we do have the authority then to have them make up that water. So what has happened here is a consortium of about 4 or 5 power companies have actually built Merrill Creek Reservoir over here in New Jersey. Really nice big reservoir, about is that 13? I think it's 13 million gallons of storage, just in the event that we got to the point where rather than having them curb the electrical power generation, we can open that up and augment the flow. I'm an engineer. I love flow charts. So what I just showed you was a map. This is an engineer's perspective of that map. Okay? So as you can see, there's the river. There's Trenton with the gauge that I talked about with our target of 3,000 CFS. And then here are all those, there's those 3 reservoirs, drinking water reservoirs from New York that release or spill water in, down. Here's the Lehigh, and we've got Beltsville. We also have the 3, these are flood control, primarily reservoirs. And then Blue Marsh is down here. So the reason I'm pointing this out is this goes back to this whole idea of you have to manage the water resource holistically. So we look at the whole thing literally as a process. So we have meteorologists on staff that are looking at how much water are we get up here, how much rain are we getting, how much snow, to determine and predict how much flow we're going to get. Because it takes to get from here to here, it takes 5 days. So you just can't like flip the switch and all of a sudden you've got what you need. Consequently, we have a team that every day is looking at flow rates and making decisions on whether or not they need to release water, or what, in order to maintain the proper flow that's in the river. And here is why, okay? I should have updated this for today, and I apologize for not doing it, but it really hasn't moved that much. So if you look at this area down here, right where Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey kind of all join at about the Delaware Memorial Bridge area, right? So what happens is you've got the salt water pushing up, or trying to push its way up, and the fresh water pushing its way down. So we like to keep what we call the salt front. That's that brackish area where the fresh and the salt water mix, and you don't want to drink that, okay? So in Philadelphia's case, their drinking water intakes are 110 miles from that border down here, that river mile, and that's how we measure on the river. River mile 110 is right there where their drinking water intakes are. Philadelphia Water Department takes raw water, treats it, pumps it out to the city of Philadelphia. They can't treat salt water. Salt is from the EPA perspective, is declared a aesthetic issue. It's taste. It won't hurt you unless you get way too much. But worse, what it does is salt's corrosive, and it will tear up the pipes and the machinery, et cetera, over time. In fact, if you have lead pipes, as a lot of people in Philly and older sections of Pennsylvania do, your water supplier probably has an anti-corrosive inhibitor that they put in the water that lines the pipe and keeps the lead from leaching out, and that's fine, but the salt will eat right through that. And as you can imagine, that can be a real problem. So we are really trying to keep the salt front from ever getting up here. I should point out that New Jersey has what they call the South Jersey Regional Water Treatment Plant in Delran, New Jersey, which is like right about here. So, so we really try to keep this pushed back. The farthest this has come up in the last couple of years, again, it was about 16, was it made it up to the airport. It was as high as the Philadelphia airport, which is too close. There's the Commodore Barry Bridge right there. There's the Delaware Memorial Bridge. And so typically in October, and it has not changed much, it's right in this area around Wilmington is where the salt front is. Wilmington does not take their drinking water out of the Delaware River. They take it out of, I think, the Christina, which is, they've got a dam, much like the Schuylkill has got a dam, so the salt water can't get up it anyhow. So this, with respect to flow, is the real reason we keep the water flowing down and manage the flow, is to protect the drinking water for the city of Philadelphia, the surrounding area, and any other water company or system that takes water from, surface water from the Delaware River, on both sides. Real quick, because you're here. So, interesting enough, this goes back to the differences between states. In New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, the state government has authority to regulate groundwater across the board. In Pennsylvania, the state, the Commonwealth, the government, does not. It only has the authority to regulate commercial groundwater use. It has no authority if a developer goes in and wants to build a big development, a housing area, and sink wells in. The state has no authority over regulating that. And so back in the 80s, when this area, of what? In fact, we're right here, okay? This area was going gangbusters, to some degree still is from a development standpoint. And all these developers were sinking straws, pipes in the ground, to suck up the water. The other thing is that the geologic area here is such that it's a lot closer to the surface. Your bedrock is closer to the surface in a lot of ways than it is elsewhere. And so that means the aquifers are up, and they're more easily depleted, so that when you're going to build a small development, you stick a well in the ground, and all of a sudden you're sucking dry because Not only that, you're sucking the guy next door dry because there's no water anymore. So the Commonwealth came to us because we do have the authority and asked us to develop this thing called the Groundwater, Southeastern Pennsylvania Groundwater Protection Area. And so we manage this, for Pennsylvania. And you can see that between 1990 and 2013, we were able to reduce the withdrawals about 23.4 million gallons a day. And in doing so, not cause any depletion of the groundwater resource and still provide water to everybody that needed it. So that was water's wet. We have enough. Do we have enough water? And can we keep the salt front pushed back? That other thing is, okay, great. What's the water quality? Okay, this is water quality in 1929, where the quality of the water routinely killed off the aquatic life. This is kind of a, more recent. We don't have fish kills so much as we have plastics and trash. To be honest, this is bad, but there are certain parts of the river because of the tide and the currents that it does not matter. If anybody's ever been over to, it's around, it's like across from Bristol, Pennsylvania. That area, for whatever reason, and they have cleanup. School kids go in there have a class come in and clean it up on day one. On day two, it looks like that again. It's just the way things are. On the other part, there are other parts of the river that are just pristine. But trash, is an issue, and it's the most visible issue of water quality that most people kind of relate to. So our job is that we are looking at water quality that, with reasonable treatment, can be used for drinking water. That can be used for recreation, that you can swim in it, you can tube in it, you can boat in it, and that wildlife, fish, and other aquatic life can not just pass through it, but can propagate and have a healthy life in it. And also why that's important is because you can then eat them, all right? And that means that we regulate waste assimilation. That is how much waste being pumped out by a sewage treatment plant can actually be assimilated by the water, can be diluted, and not have a negative impact. So here's a great example. I think someone asked if I was going to talk about dissolved oxygen, all right? In 1960, dissolved oxygen, H2O, right? The O, oxygen, it's in the water. Fish need it to breathe, just like we do. But when you put a lot of junk in the water, particularly organic material coming from sewage treatment plants, it's organic, it sits in the water, particularly when there's so much that it's not moving out. That organic material, that bacteria, consumes oxygen. It depletes the water of oxygen to the point where, in 1960, the oxygen level in the river at the Ben Franklin Bridge was 0. Now, why is that important? For a couple different reasons. One, I mentioned, fish need to breathe. And there are fish like these, and that's an American shad, and the other one's an Atlantic sturgeon, and they are, hey, fishery people here? I'm going to blow the term because I'm not a biologist, but they're androgynous fish, which means, despite if I may have mispronounced that, means they live out in the ocean, but then they travel up into the fresh water and upstream to spawn. Shad go all the way to New York, and then their juveniles swim all the way back down out into the ocean, and when they get older, the whole cycle repeats itself. Well, if you're a shad living out in the ocean and it's time to you get that instinctive urge to go upstream, and all of a sudden you run into an area largely from Philadelphia down to Wilmington almost, that has no oxygen in it, It'd be no different than if you walked into a room that all the oxygen had been sucked out. What would you do? Well, you would either turn around and go elsewhere, or you would suffocate. And that's what was happening. Both the shad and the sturgeon weren't going upstream. They couldn't make it. And the few that did make it through and made it to spawn, their juveniles had no chance of making it back down out to the ocean. So this is one of the first things that we tackled, and we worked with the dischargers. By the way, if you're working with dischargers, the first thing you do is you don't walk up to them and call them polluters, okay? But they're the point dischargers, that is, and largely they are the municipal wastewater treatment plants. And about the same time as we began working with them, now remember, we were formed in '61. Clean Air Act is 70, I think, 70, 71. Okay, Clean Water, pardon me. And that got a lot of capital in the game. So we were able then to work with the water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants, and with the influx of capital, they could change their systems. They could improve the technology, and we put them on diets. We would say, okay, Philadelphia, you're putting this much crap literally in the river. You can only put this much crap. Camden, you're smaller, so you've got a smaller amount. You know, Trenton, et cetera. And we put everybody on diets and began working with them collaboratively to get their waste streams reduced and the amount of organic material going in. And you can see the result has been an increase in dissolved oxygen. So this 3.5 milligrams per liter is our current standard that we set back in the 60s for what dissolved oxygen needed to be. And that is, generally speaking, what it takes for the shad to go through. And what we're finding is actually they are going through, but some of them are sticking around and having a good time right there in Philly, okay? They're thriving, and the shad are back. But you can see now, we're up here. And this is in July, when the water's the warmest, the heat is usually on, and that causes the bacteria to even eat, more oxygen. So this is a great story, a great success story. Now, right now we're currently working on bringing it maybe up here. And we're looking at, well, what does it take? Because we're scientists, we don't go, you know what, let's just make it 6. That sounds good. Can anybody here tell me what oxygen level an Atlantic sturgeon needs to propagate? I'd be very surprised, because even the sturgeon scientists don't know. So we're taking a look at that. We're also saying, okay, to get to 6, what does it take the Philadelphia Water Department, wastewater plant, what do they have to do? What technology do they have to put in place? What's that going to cost? Rather than simply saying, meet this, or we fine you. But end result has been, up to this point now we're at a point where we get fish going through. The second thing is, remember that story I told you about 1969 and the water stank? When you get dissolved oxygen back in the water up at these levels, the water doesn't stink. People come back, development happens. American Water built their corporate headquarters in Camden on the waterfront. They're doing paddleboard yoga. Now, can you swim at Penn's Landing? Yeah, but we still got work to do, and it's largely because Philadelphia still has a combined sewer system, which means that when it rains, unfortunately, there's nasty stuff goes out into the river. So there's still work to be done. But if you fall off your yoga paddleboard, you'll be able to get back up on your board without, with both your legs and everything, nothing eaten away. So great story on water quality there. This is a little bit more to illustrate the DO sag, or what we call the sag, and you see the dissolved oxygen, how it goes down right here. So these are the various zones in the river, and here are the river miles I talked about. So at 110 is the water treatment, the wastewater, the Philadelphia Water Department intake, okay? And these dots indicate the different wastewater treatment plants. These are the dischargers. So you can see the more dischargers that you have, and there is one of Philadelphia's right there, which indicates how much. This axis indicates how much is being put out. You can see that the more that's being put into the water, the more DO you lose, okay? So that drops us down there, and in fact, I'm sorry, this isn't even DO. This is DO, part of it, but part of it's ammonia as well, which is one of the things we're looking at right now. Okay, where does ammonia come from? Us. Okay, so until one of you folks can figure out a way to keep people from peeing and pooping, we got a problem, okay? But either way, so it is influenced primarily by these point dischargers. But, as I mentioned, it's come a long way. The shad are back. There's a shad festival in Lambertville that actually catches shad. There's a shad fishing competition in eastern Pennsylvania that they actually catch shad. And the Atlantic, not the Atlantic, the short-nosed sturgeon are actually back all the way up to Trenton in the river. The Atlantic sturgeon are the ones we're concerned about and that we're working on. So, when I talk about water quality, two areas. We're kind of put it this way. From Trenton south was the big built-up urbanized area that we were kind of charged with clean this up, make this a viable waterway. From Trenton north, it's really not built up, developed. I mean, yeah, there are some pockets up, along the rivers, in the Lehigh Valley, et cetera. But generally speaking, if you've ever been up around in the Delaware Water Gap, right there, or anywhere up in here, it is pristine. I mean, it is gorgeous. It is wooded. At night, it's the darkest place I've ever been in my life. There is no light. I mean, you can't even see the moon because you're down at the bottom of, hills like this. It is absolutely gorgeous. And so our charge is to keep it that way and not let it degrade at all. As a result, our standards for water quality are, in fact, twice as heavy, twice as drastic as they are for the rest of the basin that we're working on improving. So we're committed to not letting anything happen. Up in here, we call these the special protection waters. Why would anybody be opposed to that? Any ideas? We have one member of the Pennsylvania legislature whose district is right up in here, and he is complaining that because our standards are so tough, no businesses will move into his district and develop along the waters because the standards are too tough. He wants us to think about maybe slacking off in order to encourage business. Kind of took us by surprise. Other challenges that we've got, you can see these are things you've probably heard about in the news, et cetera. Maybe you've studied them. But right now, we've got issues with PFAS, with microplastics is the new one, really, PCBs, and then other contaminants of emerging concern, and then certainly climate. And then ultimately, we look at, as I mentioned, can we swim in it? I wouldn't recommend swimming in the river at Philadelphia Canyon because if nothing else, you get hit by a very big boat. And the current is pretty brutal as well. But let me address just some of these. So PCBs. PCBs were outlawed before most of you were born, but they're incredibly persistent. They're man-made. They largely were found in electrical equipment, transformers. They're still there. They're found in industrial sites and generating facilities, and they have leaked into the water. They are aquaphobic, which simply means they don't dissolve. They're incredibly difficult to get rid of. Because they're aquaphobic, they attach themselves to sand particles in the riverbed, to plant life, et cetera, and as a result, they get consumed by fish. Then we eat the fish, and next thing you know, you've got this carcinogen in you. So each of the states has fish consumption guidelines based upon species of how many that you can eat over what period of time and be safe. So if you want to eat more fish, we got to get the PCBs down. This is what we've been doing. So you can see that just in that 10-year frame right there, we were able to reduce PCBs by the top 10 major dischargers in the river by 76%, which is like freaking awesome. And we still have a team that's working on driving that down even further. And 2 years ago, both Pennsylvania and New Jersey raised the number of fish. You can say they lowered their advisory or raised the number of fish, whatever, that you can now eat because of the potential for PCB contamination is way, way down. Don't have to talk about that. PFAS is the new one, which is perfluorinated, alkyo, whatever. And it's a set of substances, PFOA, PFNA, et cetera. The one that has really gotten a lot of publicity here lately, locally, is PFOA and PFAS, which is found at the Willow Grove Naval Air Station and contaminating the groundwater because of all the firefighting training. It comes largely from different things like foam used in firefighting, and has contaminated the groundwater and is now working its way in and contaminating both private and public wells. And as a result, there are some towns in Bucks County, for example, that in fact are now getting their water out of the river as opposed to out of the well. So we've got a team that's working on PFAS and looking at, you can see, this is just an example of one of our sampling, protocols where we have got a number of different sites we're regularly checking to see, where PFAS is going, if it's there, because our concern is obviously it's groundwater, it's in the aquifer, it will ultimately make it into the surface water. I will mention that every 5 years we're required to produce something called the State of the Basin. And this is a page from the State of the Basin, and I brought about 25 copies of it for those of you that are interested, where under water quality you can see under different criteria we've given the basin kind of a passing grade or a needs work grade, ranging from fair to good to very good, depending on what it is. You can see the dissolved oxygen is good. pH about the same. And one of the things that we're just starting to look at now is chlorides. We're looking at chlorides, particularly in the upper part of the river. Why would there be chlorides in a pristine section of the basin? Anybody know? Road salt, we think. Pardon me? Possibly, but there's no one up there to be doing chlorination, necessarily from a water treatment standpoint. So, but right now, the big finger is being pointed at road salt, because if you look at where the indicators are seasonally, when chlorides go up, when road salt's going down. And so, but before I can just make a accusation like that, we need to make sure that, I've got to study it. So we've got a study in place to do that. Microplastics. There's a study in Australia, I read in a paper about a few months ago, that says that on average, each of us is consuming about 1 credit card worth of plastic every month. And this is not, I'm not saying plastic bags, because that's the trend, straws. Well, they might contribute to this ultimately because it takes forever for those things to break down. To get into the size we're talking for microplastics, to the point where there's a University of Delaware great study and a survey that shows a blood cell from I think it's an oyster, that has a piece of plastic in the blood cell. That's how small it is and how insidious this can be. And so where are these things coming from? How many people use those little pods to wash their dishes or wash their laundry? It's great. they dissolve, they go away, they flush down the toilet. That's plastic. And it falls apart into little tiny pieces that no wastewater treatment plant is designed to collect or stop. And it means it goes out into the river, ultimately to the bay. It's eaten by fish, or it's just consumed somehow by fish. And we end up eating that. So if you eat seafood, if you like fish, you've probably got a healthy dose of this. We just started last year started a 3-year program to take a real hard look at, is this a problem? We think it is. Everybody seems to be excited about it, but to take a look and see if it is, where it is, and then ultimately, what do we do about it? Aquatic life, I talked about real quickly. Shad are the ones we've been dealing with for the most part. Every year, we take part in what's called the Young of Year survey. We take a seining net out at a couple different consistent spots, Trenton, Phillipsburg, et cetera, and then do seines where we bring in the fish and we count the young, the juvenile, to see what's happening with those. And by the way, you're all welcome anytime. We do it around August. To come out and join us, because all that's required is that you not be afraid to grab a fish and go one and grab another one. Here's an example, from again, the state of the basin. Shad right now are pretty good, and you can see particularly this scale right here from the seining efforts in the non-tidal river, because that's what we're looking at typically, and over time, the trend more recently is up. Atlantic sturgeon, I mentioned, is an issue. It's a problem. We're just now starting to just figure out, get our hands around what's going on. At one point in time, the Delaware Bay, was the world's largest population of Atlantic sturgeon. We sold caviar to the Russians. Now, it's hard to find them. It takes about 14 years for a juvenile to become an adult. These things are like dinosaurs. I mean, literally, that's how old they are. And so we're working with Delaware to try and monitor them and track them and find out what's going on. We've had a couple of exercises where we've gone out and try to capture them and then, tag them basically with a responder to kind of get a better sense and understanding of where they go. Because it's interesting, it seems, we're pretty sure that the ones that are in the bay, even though they go out to the ocean, always come back to the same place, to the same bay. So the population in the bay here, the Delaware Bay, there's a population in the Hudson River as well, all the way to the Bear Mountain Bridge in New York. And there's a lot of them, but they don't come down to see us. So we've got to see what we can do to get our arms around, find out what the problem is, see if we can fix this. Again, part of the problem too might be the dissolved oxygen levels, and we've got a study right now to look at that. Trends, we need more monitoring, telemetry studies. We're working with the University of Delaware on that. And if you've never seen a sturgeon, that's a sturgeon. I forgot, I was telling Rich, I forgot, I'm supposed to have right here, some sort of legal phrase that said no sturgeon were harmed during this research, and it was authorized under permit, yada, 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 so please take my word for it. The sturgeon, who you can see is resting comfortably on a padded cot, was tagged, measured, I think it gave him a name, and then and put him back in the water, sort of thing. But and they get bigger than that. So climate change. We look at climate change. I put it. This actually came from Rutgers, but this is kind of where we're approaching it. We're not looking at climate change as a global phenomenon. I mean, we got that right. But the impact is what's happening locally in the basin. What is the impact going to be on your water supply from climate change? So we're not really looking at, is Manhattan going to be underwater, or the polar bears, and what we're looking at, what's happening upstream, you know? And what we're seeing is this: more warm extremes and fewer colder extremes. And what's happening, I'll give you a classic example. Those 3 reservoirs I talked about up in New York State, we always relied on the snowpack in the spring to start melting, and that gave us the water that we needed to come downstream and help with the salt front. Guess what? Anybody seen snow lately? No. And as a result, what's happening is it's raining in the winter, and that water is immediately coming downstream. So we're not getting, we've got to change. We've got to do something different because, you know, if you're New York City, you don't want to give up any more. That's your drinking water. You don't want to say, oh, well, I'm going to give you my water. In the past, it was no big deal because it was all snow melting. Now, we don't have that issue. So it's something we're going to be looking at real quick. Sea level rise is a real big thing. And if you know, sea level rise is not sea level rise in the basin is real, and it's scientifically and data proven. We have data that goes all the way back to 1900, and the sea level at Philadelphia is up in 100 years about a foot. So whether you want to believe in trends or whatever, the hard fact is it's up. And so if you remember, the bay is shaped like this. All that water's pushing up. If you've ever done any kind of either hydraulics, you know, studies, et cetera, you know, it picks up velocity as it gets squeezed in. That means that there's going to be, the salt water is going to be pushing, the higher it is, the more salt water there is, the harder it's going to be pushing up, which means we may need more water pushing back. And this is just one of the models that we're, or a representation of one of the models that we're working on. And you can see that the drinking water intakes at 110, if the salt water starts working, it's, what do? Does Philadelphia have to like reroute their drinking water intakes? You can imagine how expensive that's going to be. Or do we find ways to get more fresh water to push down? So it's, oh, I'm sorry, and subsidence. Anybody know what subsidence is? Anybody here from Jersey? South Jersey? I live there too. We're sinking. South Jersey is actually, at the same time sea level rise is going up, South Jersey and parts of Delaware are geologically, now granted, this is like geologic time, right? So we're talking, you know, thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. But it actually is subsiding, it's sinking a bit. And that just exacerbates then the push on the water headed upstream. And yeah, so impacts. We've been doing modeling that says if it raises this much, how far is that going to push the salt front up? And so we've got a group, in fact, we just announced that we have several advisory committees made up of scientists and leading academics and industry people on different things like water quality, et cetera, because like I said, we're a small group. So these people provide us with outstanding advice, which then again, we can turn around and tell the governors what's going on. We just announced the formation of an advisory committee on climate change. So we can take a really hard look at what's going on in the basin, because before you say, we need another reservoir, which might take 20 years to build, okay, and billions of dollars, or I've got the one reservoir I told you about, Effie Waters, it's kind of empty most of the time. Why can't we fill that up and use that? You know, or fill it up halfway and use it, still have enough to accommodate, or build more dam. And those are the kinds of things we're looking at. Oh. So right now, the basin's vulnerable to floods and droughts. And you don't care about droughts. You only care about floods because floods take out your basement, your porch, your dog, whatever. Droughts, you get through it and then you don't even remember it a month later. But you know, reservoirs were constructed on the tributaries for flood damage reduction, but is that going to be enough? We've got extensive studies conducted after the drought of record back in the 60s to build resiliency, and we're doing a good job of that to keep the salt front pushed back. I'm sorry, salinity repulsion is the official word for that, okay? And we've got both basin-wide and lower basin drought management plans in place. And we've got plans for everything. We've been around 60, you take a bunch of engineers and put them in a room for almost 60 years, you got plans that, more plans you know what to do with. But there's a lot of uncertainty about climate change, and that's why we're really working that hard to take a look and figure out what do we got to do so we're not taken by surprise, and we can continue our work on keeping it wet and keeping it clean. This is in the state of the basin. I welcome you to take a piece or find it online. But you can see sturgeon, poor. We're in trouble. We need to be working on that. The rest of these, weak fish, haven't figured out why weak fish are not doing well. Might be in the name. But generally speaking, things are good on the aquatic life in the basin. And that's it. So I apologize for going way over, and Reg, I don't know what you would do in terms of questions. Yeah, and you're a student here, right? Yeah, uh-huh. No.
Around it. You've got boating, you've got people who depend on it. So I'm curious around these other reservoirs, what happens when you have to release that water to the basin?
Which reservoir?
Well, I'm talking about Lake Galena, but I assume
yeah.
other reservoirs, even like Wallenpaupack,
Yeah.
people have whole lives around it.
Correct.
So what happens when you draw the water out of there?
Wallenpaupack is actually an emergency situation. So the two major where we actually have and own the water in them are Blue Marsh and Beltsville reservoirs. And those are our two go-tos, okay? If we get into a real drought situation, then we can start calling on other places like Wallenpaupack. Because if we're in a drought and we need water to protect the water systems, then I'm sorry, you're not going boating that day. So every reservoir typically has, whether it's flood control or it is flow augmentation as a role, those are authorized by Congress. No one comes out and says, Lake Wallenpaupack. Wallenpaupack's recreation, that's its primary purpose for being there. So we're not going to touch that. It's a backup for flow augmentation, i.e. drought issues, but it would be in a drought emergency. We'd have to, call on that.
So I had a question. I was wondering if...
Sorry, where? Oh, I'm sorry. There you go.
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you were expecting any water quality decline because of the wildfire that happened in New Jersey just this past week, because it was in an area that you said that was the special protections water.
Actually, to be honest, I was not even aware there was a wildfire. Wildfires kind of happen all the time, and it would have to be, we're part of a larger group that's kind of an emergency warning system whenever anything happens. And 9 times out of 10, it's a man-made issue. There's a spill of some kind, et cetera. But also, 99 out of 100 times, it is, even though you would think, oh my God, this is horrible, it's not big enough to actually have an impact to get us involved. What we will do is, on a lot of these, our modeling teams, with the computer modeling, because of the models we've built on the river and on flow analysis, are able to look at a spill, for example, and then tell Pennsylvania DEP, based on our analysis, this is where this thing's going to go, this is how fast it's going to move, et cetera, so that they can then react operationally and put things in place. But yeah, as far as the, no one said anything to me about a forest fire today, so.
I have a question based on what I was able to get from what you said. Now, this whole thing about the PCBs, why are they still considered a problem since they've been banned for use since 1979, I mean, we're talking about more than 40 years if my arithmetic
Sure.
is, well, almost 40 years if my arithmetic
Well,
is
I'll just
correct.
answer that with a question. So what level of PCBs are you willing to consume?
Based on what I've studied about them, I wouldn't even want to be near
Correct, yeah.
1 part per billion.
Right, so the game there is, you know, if we can get that, the ultimate goal is to get rid of them, you know?
But why are they still around? I mean, nobody's been using them since 79 unless
No,
you're
they
breaking
are.
the law.
No, PCBs are still very much in use. They're banned in terms of anything new, right? Like you can't make a new generating system with PCBs, but you may have a very old generating system from the 1970s, all right? Or you may have electrical components that have wiring that have PCBs in the wiring. You know, some of that plastic coating on wiring,
Yeah, I
okay?
get it.
Some of that was made with PCBs in it, all right? So you may, you know, there's still a lot of stuff out there that's still operational and in use. Additionally, there are a lot of places that had PCBs that, frankly, they went out of business and their equipment just sits there, and eventually over time, it works its way into the groundwater. You know, so if you look at like New Jersey, down around Penns Grove to, you know, that whole area that was like a refinery, it was DuPont, it was, you know, whatever. That's a major site that we're working with the owners there to get that cleaned up. Philadelphia had that major refinery that had the fire, and they
I
went
remember
bankrupt.
the fire.
Yeah, so we're taking a look with the new owners as to what do they got there, you know, because that sits right on the Schuylkill.
Yeah. Also, does that also involve the asbestos problem?
That I can't address. Asbestos is not sort of in our wheelhouse. Asbestos is typically more of an air issue, and we're really.
Hi, first I just wanted to thank you for coming and speaking. It was very engaging. But I did have a question regarding, because I know you said you did some work regarding groundwater, and I was wondering if you've come across any complications and issues considering the whole debate of whether it's covered under the Clean Water Act or not, whether it's navigable waters. Do you have issues with uses, you know, where maybe you have people dumping that is affecting groundwater that could potentially be leaching?
Well, I think there's two questions there. I mean, one is that the whole issue of what are the waters of the United States? Are they the navigable waters? I mean, the Obama administration came up with a series of guidelines and definitions. The Trump administration has then just recently come up with I think a series of definitions that are a little less restrictive. And all I can say is we're paying attention to that and we're watching that. As far as the groundwater goes, our jurisdiction, even on surface water or on groundwater, is generally speaking, it's got to be enough of an issue that it's going to have a significant impact on the waters of the basin. So, for example, if you want, you know, you've got a house and you want to sink your own well, that's between you and probably your local municipality, all right? Because there's no way you're going to be doing like 10,000, 100,000 gallons of water a day. Once you cross that threshold, then you got to come and we got to talk, because then we'll look at the overall groundwater tables and figure out, okay, can you raise your pumpage, lower your pumpage? And that's why we tend to deal largely more with business organizations or farms or municipalities who have ski slopes, okay? How much water that is used for snow on a ski slope goes back into the system, melts and ends up back in the stream? Actually, well, the legislator that represents that district thinks it all goes back, yeah. But 26% of all the water that goes into making snow evaporates, okay? And so a ski slope, as you can imagine, we take a look at that. Now, you want to make a snow machine, you know, for the holidays, and you're going to do something in your yard, have at it, you know, because whatever it is, that or groundwater, for example, has to have a significant impact for us to get involved. I mean, I don't think anybody wants us to get involved on the mini, you know, I mean, God, if we were trying to, we've already been accused of trying to, you know, monopolize life activities because of fracking. You know, and we have very set sort of standards for what we get involved in, what our swim lane is, if you will.
All right, so.
This is always scary when they're reading from notes that they took on something like that, yes.
Sorry. When talking about PBCs, where exactly does your jurisdiction end in comparison to the EPA?
Oh, okay, well, we predate EPA, and we work with EPA. And there are, with respect to standards, I think EPA and we agree that none is acceptable, okay? If you look at PFAS, for example, we've been asked actually to come up with potentially a standard for PFAS. New Jersey has a really tough standard on it. It's tougher than the overall federal. They don't have an MCL, you know, they have a health advisory limiter, because they're going to have to study it for another 5 years before they can come up with, you know, whatever. So we're also taking a look at that. But as I keep going back to, there are 39 on a good day, you know, working on all this stuff that I talked about. But yeah, so we work very collaboratively with the EPA. We work very collaboratively with the states. So like on issues like in, say, the Schuylkill River, generally that's all Pennsylvania. So as long as DEP is operating with standards that we're okay with, then we let Pennsylvania take care of that. Our major concern is like going to be on the main stem, which is interstate.
Yeah, so in terms of water quality, and you mentioned that you had a threshold. You were primarily looking at the 6 or 7 major polluters. You called them something else.
I'm sorry, what major?
Polluters, you called them dumpers, or I don't know what, the outflow, discharges.
Oh, I'm sorry, the discharges, yeah.
So what about the little ones that are really that are adding to the poor quality of the water?
Mm-hmm.
You know, can we look at New Hope or Lambertville? Is there some overflow dumping that's happening in some of the smaller towns that?
Well, okay, there's two things there. So one, New Hope and Lambertville are in that special protection water, so the standards there are even tighter than they are on, say, Philadelphia and Camden. All right? So if you're talking about the municipal waste system in Lambertville, yes, they're under our jurisdiction. They have a docket with us. It comes up for review periodically, okay? And so, yeah, I would say they're a concern, but they are part of the portfolio, if you will. Oh, no. Yeah, they're at a threshold where they come under jurisdiction. But if you're asking about, I don't know, an individual is dumping, I mean, we're concerned about that, but we don't regulate, you know, illegal dumping is illegal dumping, okay? And if we had to, we do have police powers that we could enforce on something like that, although in, like the case of Lambertville, you got the PA, DEP, the state police, et cetera, that be in on that, and we'd work collaboratively with them. Absolutely. Yes, sir. In fact, not even, I mean, we got smaller stuff in Lambertville, golf courses, you know, and we will work with them.
Hi, thank you. So regarding the commission's mandate regarding consumptive use by power companies, understanding that you're an engineer, not a lawyer, but could you speak towards that standard? Is there some type of standard in place, or is it just discretionary when you can ask the power company to dial back their usage?
Yeah,
And-
no, there are specific requirements in place that would have to be fulfilled before we could do that. the first thing we would do is, once we hit that requirement, was we would call the folks that run, in that case, Merrill Creek Reservoir, and say, we need you to release X amount of water. And that would be factored in along with all the other reservoirs that that we'd be looking at. Yeah, believe me, we have one lawyer. Power companies have got, well, way more than one.
So I guess I didn't really phrase the question the right way. I guess it's more of a matter of, does the power company ultimately have the ability to say no to you if the commission suggests?
They'd be violating federal and state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
That answers it.
It goes back to the fact we're not like a nonprofit, or there are a lot, a bunch of well-meaning folks. Well, we are well-meaning, but we're a government agency. It's a little weird, but we're
Right.
both federal and interstate. But
It's not a suggestion then, it's condition X is met, power company.
if we hit a certain requirement that then said, hey, Exelon, you need to, empty out X amount, those actually are already in place. Those, we don't even have to go out, we'd probably tell Exelon that we're doing it, we would tell the reservoir operator to make it happen. And those agreements are already in place. And you're right, if someone did something inaccurately or incorrectly or whatever, then we have the authority to fine or whatever. And we do not with the power companies, but we've had to conduct enforcement sorts of operations on different organizations. But it's really rare. And usually it's an administrative screw up on their part.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. Please thank our speaker tonight. Peter's done a great job.
Could I, real quickly, I would just say, for those of you that are undergrads, or grads, we do have 2 paid internship positions with the commission this summer. We just refer to them as outreach, basin outreach coordinator interns. But what we found out last year, we had a kid who was an environmental science major, and he was awesome because if you like getting out and explaining to people why water is important, what's in the water, how we test the water, where your water comes from, all of that, then you'll love these because you'll be going all over the basin. You'll be playing with macroinvertebrates. You'll probably be out on the river, either if not on a kayak, certainly on a much bigger boat, in helping us get the word out and educate the public. So I just encourage you to grab one of these if you get a chance.
And I also want to make a plug for something else coming up. So the Heritage Conservancy is working with is it Bucks Herald Publishing, right? Is it full publishing? So Bucks Herald Publishing, and they are working to bring cohesive action on behalf of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And I doubt that there are too many other people in the room who actually participated in Earth Day events, the first one, but I did. And so this is bringing together actions. So DelVal is one of the partners. The Delaware River Basin Commission is a partner in this. There are a number of other organizations across the region that are part of this. They're going to be looking to have collective action on the benefit of the planet, the one that you guys live on, one I live on. For students, you're going to be hearing about pledges for your own personal behavior, not just the students, but anyone else as well. So I will soon be sending those out and starting to collect pledges. I personally wasn't aware of it until I heard from Peter about this. I use pods in my dishwasher. Not anymore, thanks to Peter. So if there are other things that you can do, can you reduce the use of single-use plastics? Can you reduce water usage? Don't let the water just run down when you're brushing your teeth, whatever. All kinds of personal actions. Can you participate in a creek cleanup? Any kind of volunteer activities, tree planting, etc. Pride and Polish will probably be oriented toward this. A-Day is now got a theme of Earth Day. So DelVal's going to try and put its efforts toward this, and we ask everybody else too. So, as always, Peter's here, Shannon's here. Get an opportunity to do some networking, possibilities of jobs that pay, and also we've got the state of the bay or the river report, basin, that's right, the basin report. Thank you all. Our next seminar is March 19th or something like that. You'll hear about it. And again, people from the community, if you haven't got on one of our email lists and you want to be, there's a sign up here. Thank you.